Fragment 6 from Clement Stromata Book 3 reads as follows, quote, "The followers of Basilides say that when the apostles asked if it were better not to marry, the Lord responded, 'Not all can accept this teaching, for there are eunuchs from birth and those from necessity.' They explain this saying as follows, quote, 'Some have a natural aversion to women from birth, and by following their natural temperament, they rightly do not marry. These are the eunuchs from birth. The eunuchs by compulsion are the theatrical ascetics who control themselves on account of the counter impulse of glory. Those who have suffered the misfortune of castration have also become eunuchs by compulsion. It follows that those who are eunuchs by compulsion aren't eunuchs for any rational cause, but those who have made themselves eunuchs for the sake of the eternal kingdom, due to the circumstances which arise from marriage, these people use rational reflection, they say, since they fear lack of time caused by providing necessities. And with regard to the phrase, better to marry than to burn, the apostle means don't throw your soul into fire, resisting night and day and fearing that you might fall from self-control. For when the soul meets with this struggle, it is cut off from its hope. So resist, Isidore says verbatim in his Ethics, the combative woman, so that you aren't dragged from God's grace. After ejaculating the fire, pray with a good conscience. When your thanksgiving slips into supplication and you in the end ask not to act correctly, but simply not to fall, then get married. But a man who is young, poor, or prone to vice, who does not want to marry according to reason, let him not separate from his brother. Let him say, 'I have come to the holy things. I cannot suffer anything.' But if he has suspicion about himself, let him say, 'Brother, lay your hand on me that I not sin,' and he will receive help both intelligible and perceptible. Only let him want to prepare the good, and he will find it." Sometimes we say with the mouth, we don't want to sin, but our mind is disposed to sin. Such a person does not do what he wants due to fear, so that punishment is not meted out for him. Humanity has certain necessary and physical desires. Others are only physical. Clothing oneself is necessary and natural. Sexual pleasures are natural, but not necessary. Now, this fragment, I think, probably comes entirely from Isidore's Ethics, although Clement only cites this work midway through the quotation. The Ethics evidently dealt with moral problems faced by the Christian. They are, or give an example of early Christian pastoral care. The fragment underscores that Christian philosophy was a way of life, an ethical path. The fragment contains Isidore's interpretation of what is now Matthew 19, verses 11 to 12, and it shows that Basilideans treated a version of the Matthean wave as an authoritative writing. The verses from Matthew are initially paraphrased and shortened by either Isidore or Clement. Eunuchs from the womb of the mother are shortened to eunuchs from birth. These men are said to be basically asexual, manifesting an aversion to women. Eunuchs made eunuchs by people in Matthew become eunuchs from necessity. These include literal eunuchs, who were mostly male slaves castrated in boyhood for various purposes. On the metaphorical level, this class also includes theatrical ascetics, people who are sexually continent to draw attention to themselves. Such people are governed by the inward necessity of selfishness and fame. The third category of self-made eunuchs for the sake of the kingdom of heaven is initially omitted, but in the comments they are referred to as eunuchs for the sake of the eternal kingdom. These are the people who take Paul's advice in 1 Corinthians 7, 28 to 35. They seek to live without distraction, and the greatest distraction is the need to provide for a wife and children in these troubled times. So their decision is informed by fear of not being able to provide, but Isidore emphasizes their rational reflection. These are the only rational eunuchs. The rational eunuch is not actually physically castrated. Isidore is not recommending medical castration to prevent sexual desire. He argued for the use of rational reflection to control sexual desire. And this is important because we know that sometime between 150 and 154, a young Alexandrian Christian actually did petition the governor, Munatius Felix, to have his testicles removed by doctors, and he needed permission because of Rome's anti-castration laws. This young man didn't simply send a petition, he sent Felix a small tract laying out the logic for his castration. And when the governor refused, the young man, along with those of like mind, lived the life of eunuchs with their testicles intact. If they couldn't reshape their bodies, they could still transform their minds to attain a sexless ideal. Apparently, this attempted castrator belonged to a wider circle of celibate Christians in Alexandria. We know nothing else about him. From Isidore's comments, we can determine that Isidore himself was a moderate ascetic, a Pauline type of ascetic, who believed that the best Christian life need not involve the creation of a family. We might infer that Isidore himself was one of these self-made eunuchs for the eternal kingdom. The fact that Isidore was thinking of 1 Corinthians 7 is indicated by his later citation of 7 verse 9, that is, better to marry than to burn. Isidore emphasized virtually the same point that Paul did. If people, young men specifically, can't be self-controlled, let them marry. Both Paul and Isidore thought of marriage as a medicine for lust, lust being likened to an internal fire. What they were apparently trying to prevent was men deflowering women out of wedlock. Isidore was also trying to prevent the constant internal struggle, which separates people from their hope, apparently their hope of transcending the body and its urges. Then Isidore's exhortation takes an interesting turn. He exhorts men to endure or to struggle against a combative woman so that you are not dragged from God's grace. Who is this combative woman? The language comes from Proverbs 21:19 in the Septuagint. Quote, "It's better to dwell in a desert land than with a woman who is combative, garrulous, and irascible." Unquote. The combative woman could, of course, be literal. It could be a shrewish wife. But in context, Isidore seems to be speaking to unmarried men. Thus, I understand the combative woman as metaphorical, and specifically as referring to lust. Lust could be personified as a female, and as Aphrodite in particular. And Aphrodite could be imperious, as we see her in the Iliad, Book 3. In one particular scene, Aphrodite appears to Helen as an old Spartan woman. At first, she coaxes and then commands Helen to go to Paris, aka Alexander, and have sex with him in an upper chamber. Now, one can learn to resist or to endure Aphrodite, and one can do so by the grace or gift of God. Perhaps the gift of God is ejaculation itself. One ejaculates the fire, Isidore says. Apparently, this fire is a reference to semen associated with the hot and fiery nature of pneuma. It's not a sin to ejaculate, according to Isidore, for afterward one can pray with a good conscience. But how exactly does one ejaculate? Was Isidore talking about wet dreams or masturbation or some other means? He doesn't specify. It's all a bit coy. I suspect that masturbation is at least included as a means to dampen the raging force and to remove oneself from fire, or to remove the fire itself. If I'm correct, this would actually be the first Christian discussion of masturbation, and it's essentially positive. As Isidore clarifies at the end of the fragment, sexual desire is entirely natural. Perhaps he thought that God gave a natural gift to exhaust this desire, a release valve, as it were. The end goal, of course, is not to awaken and feed sexual desire, but to dampen and even to destroy it. Isidore explains the order of prayer. It begins with thanksgiving and then proceeds to petition. What he seems to be saying is that if one finds oneself asking God simply not to fall into sexual sin, then one should marry. The point of life is to do what is right. If one spends most of one's time struggling with sexual temptation, then marriage is a good solution. It's not the best form of Christian life, but it is better than falling into sexual sin and into constant temptation. Isidore then deals with objections. What if one is too young or too poor or too prone to vice to make a rational decision to marry possible? In that case, one is to seek the companionship or fellowship of a Christian brother. Does this assume some sort of monastic arrangement, Christian brothers living together? Evidently. But it's a long time before formal monasticism. At any rate, these Christian Basilidean brothers imagine themselves as entering into holy things, which might mean intelligible and sacred mysteries or truths. In this context of learning, one could keep one's mind away from disturbing desires. But if a brother doubted himself, he could ask another brother to, quote, lay your hand on me that I not sin, unquote. This could simply be a hand of comfort or support for the person undergoing temptation. In context, however, the hand could also be a fondling hand. The help that the brother gives is both intelligible and sensible, that is, physical. The physical help may involve masturbation with the help of another. Isidore does not recommend full-on intercourse with a member of the same sex. He simply advises that help be given to a brother struggling with sexual temptation, and the rest is up for interpretation. The intent of both brothers must be to prepare something good. In context, something good would be healing from lust and a return to the higher consciousness, or the consciousness that contemplates higher intelligible things. The final comment seems to be dealing with potentially hypocritical brothers who confess their will not to sin, but who nevertheless have a mental disposition to sin. Such a person must be deterred by fear of punishment. Again, the end goal is to arrive at a place where one does not have a desire for sex. Sexual desire is natural but not necessary. Epicurus had divided pleasures into three categories: natural and necessary, natural but not necessary, and neither natural nor necessary. To Isidore, at least, wearing clothes is both natural and necessary, but sex, although natural, is not necessary. Sexual desire is incredibly powerful and strongly rooted in our biology. Nevertheless, one can live a fully human life without sex, and this is a reasonable goal for a Christian to have. One should never unnecessarily excite sexual desire, but should aim to live without it. Now, all of this teaching from Isidore might not be the Basilidean teaching you are familiar with. Perhaps you were expecting some raging libertines in wild parties, but as in most things regarding gnosis and Gnosticism, there's a finely tuned mix of liberty and strictness in this passage. The fact that most people are simply unfamiliar with it just goes to show that popular AI sorts of sources for information about Basilides tend to be ignorant of what actual Basilideans said.